Hey guys, we are back with the inventory tutorial. So, I've been requested by several people to actually make inventory equipment slots, right? So here is what we will be doing today. We will actually add two different slots. So here we will be doing two, but you can make as many as you want. And the point is that I'm actually pointing the wrong screen. I actually can grab any item and bring it to its slot as long as the slot matches, right? Because here we have a weapon slot, here we have an armor slot, and we basically can't drag a weapon in the armor. But dragging the armor here works, and then you can choose to move the items, have them swap, except that when it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit. So this is what we will be doing today. So as you can see, there is quite a lot to do in this video, so I'm just leaving this a few seconds so that you can see the content on the right. And those tasks are just for me, but here the table of content is basically everything that we will be doing. And yeah, if you want to quickly look back at the summary of what is in this video, it's there. Okay, let's not waste time and actually start with what we have to do. So first, I want to import new assets. So I will be importing a new item, a few placeholders, as well as a character texture. So I did bring the bully minion, chest placeholder, weapon placeholder, and leather armor. So as for the placeholders, I just changed the color of the textures to something darker, and I also reduced the opacity, but yeah, that's why they look darker, but really anything you want will fit. So here we have the assets. Now we do want to actually create new abstracts for the items, because we will be creating not just items, but specific items. We will start by creating a weapon abstract. And here we basically just want to extend the item class, because weapons are items, but we will add a new line to it, which will be its damage. I put a default value to it, but I don't think it's necessary. It's just for the sake of having a safety net. So we do have the weapon now. And basically what you want to do is to create this kind of abstracts for every type of items you want. So here, I also added a leather armor to the game. So I will create a new type, which will be the chest. So again, a default value. And now we have our two abstracts ready. So now that we have new items, abstracts, we just need to first update the items which already exist, and then we have to create a new one for the leather armor that we added in the assets. Updating an already existing resource is just all about changing the scripts that we are reading. And here we want to read weapon instead of item. So I'm giving values to damages and protection, but to be fair, I won't bother with actually applying the effects of those stats on the player. Here I'm mostly caring about how to make the inventory part of this. Nice, we do have the items to test things. So now we will jump to the inventory in order to be able to add the new item types behavior. So what I want to do basically is to change the way we store items. So the point of this video is not to be looking at how to manage different containers, but we will have to do it, right? Because we will basically have the bag, which will contain all the items, and we will have the equipment, which will contain whatever is currently equipped. So we will have to do that a little bit. Also, I will actually change the way we store the items within the inventory, because now it's actually quite necessary to have more information than just whatever the item is in the inventory, right? So what I'm doing instead is I will create a new object to replace this item object here. I actually decided to put this class within the inventory class itself, and what this object will represent is the slot of the inventory. So it will contain more information regarding both the nature, the properties of the slot, as well as what's in it. Okay, let's pause here to look at what we have. I created two properties which are basically here to document the position and basically the coordinates of the slot. So we do have the container. So basically the slot contains a reference to its own container. And then we have the index, which is the position of the slot within that container. Aside from that, we do have the information of the item which is contained within, and the placeholder, if there's any, that is on the slot. So very simple here, I just bring in the container and index values that I will store in the slot, and then I will make sure that both the item and the placeholder are null. All right, so we do have this slot type. So we could, let's create the specific types now. The point is that in the inventory itself, in the bag, any items can fit any slot, right? So these are generic slots. However, the equipment container, which will define whatever is equipped or not equipped, will not be able to accept any kind of items within each and every slot. So we will actually create new types of behaviors based on what they will accept within. So what's gonna happen here basically is I will create two new classes, which will be the weapon slot and the chest slot, which will be extensions of the already existing slot. Basically, right now we don't necessarily need to define anything more to understand what they will do, but yeah, I actually want to add placeholders actually. Yep. So I will add the placeholders now. So what we want to do basically is update this init method right there. So that we do change the placeholder values after this. So the way we do that is simply declaring the init value again. So now we could basically be completely rewriting the constructor. That could be a thing. Or we could use the super instruction to call on the already existing constructor. So since we actually have two classes, I will actually do both so that you can see both situations. So you basically now can see both situations, so you can choose whatever you prefer. But yeah, I initially confused the textures. So now we properly have the weapon here and the chest here. All right. We do have the slots classes. So I can tell you already that we will add the point of creating new classes which extend the slot here is to basically add a function that will be can move, sort of. I will show you now. Okay, I think I will show you and we will make those functions now. Here I opened the inventory slot component of the scene. I want to bring your attention to this part of the script basically, which is the drag and drop part. So the main problem I have is this can drop data. If you remember the beginning of the series, I told you that I actually wanted to separate the logic from the interface, right? So I wanted the logic to be within the singleton and the interface to just be displaying things. Right there, it's actually very simple. We just want to check that the item we are coming from is different from where we are. However, now that we are working with equipment slots, this will get very big, very, very big. And having all the behaviors within there would be quite complicated. So what I want to do basically is to make sure that all these behaviors of can drop data is managed by the inventory singleton and not by the UI nodes. This will actually allow us to be able to just keep this one inventory slot component and not to have to create different scenes, different components based on the slot, right? So we don't have to create a component for a weapon slot, which will be used once, or a chest slot, which will again be used once. Instead of having, 5 slots, we will have basically 5 types in there. So the main reason why I created this slot extension is to actually be able to write a method can move in. So this method that I just created, can move in, will take a slot as an argument, and then the receiving slot will tell us if the item or whatever is contained within the slot that we are currently watching can move in or not. So here we will actually return false if the container, if the slot is exactly the same as the one which we are currently in. Alright, so by default, we want any slot, a basic generic slot, to accept anything as long as it doesn't come from itself. Now, the other type of slots will actually be refusing objects based on their types, so we'll actually have to rewrite the behaviors based on the type of the slot. Okay, so here we are overriding the generic method. So we take the actual first instruction. If the slots are the same, then we don't move in. And if the item, we first check if there is an item. If there's an item and that it is not a weapon, then we don't want it to move in. Otherwise, if there's no problem, then we agree, and yes, we return true. So now let's do exactly the same with the chest class. And so here we just have to change the type, and we're good. So, okay, we do have those slot types being described correctly. So now we can basically go back to the content of the inventory in order to change how this inventory is working. So the content is an array of items, and we can't use that anymore. So instead, what we will be using is a dictionary. So using dictionaries is kind of annoying because we can't use types. So I'm actually considering using only arrays because of this type thing, but for the sake of this episode, because it's actually clearer to read and understand, I will be using a dictionary despite the type problem. So here's the line. What we're doing is we create a dictionary that will contain all the different containers of the inventory of the game. So we do have the bag, which is the main inventory, and the equipment, which contains the equipment slot. Because of this modification, we actually have to make a lot of changes. So now that we actually changed the type of the content property, we actually do have to reference the container on top of referencing content. We do need to change the way we generate the slots now, because we don't just add empty items, we need to add the new slots with their indexes. I'm also fixing this thing that I forgot in the first episode. Right, so here in the content bag, we add a new generic slot by creating a new slot. We reference the container, so it's content bag, and its index, which is the index of the loop generation. I will actually add the equipment slot at the same time. So we're not gonna loop for the equipment slots because that will be complicated and unnecessary. We'll have only two things right now. So I'm just gonna add manually to the equipment array those two new slots. So we do created our two equipment slots. Now I will just add a leather armor to our items so that we can later on put it in the right slot. Now to the add item method. So right here we need to change a few things, okay? So we will actually rename the slot property index, right? Because that's what we will have now, and slot is a new type that we use. So we'll have the index of the first empty slot. And what we want to do is to change the contents of that slot. So here we just change the content of the slot based on the item we want to add. There's a warning. Okay, we didn't infer the type here, so let's just do it for the sake of doing it. Yeah. So anyway, back to our add item. Yeah, I actually derailed from my script here because it looks bad and this looks better. I just hope I didn't make any mistake, but I don't see why this would be a mistake. Anyway, let's move on to the next method. So here removing item is actually the same. We do need to get the within the item right there. And we're good. Now if we do want to remove an item, again, what we have to do basically is to make sure that we do check not on the slot itself, but the item within the slot. Move item is probably a little bit more complicated. Right, so we do want to change the types of whatever we're putting in, right? Because we don't put in integers but slots now. And what we check is basically the items within the slots. And we basically change all the lines to make sure that we do reach the item within the right slot. Here we have an error because the next function takes integers, but we will want to change it to take slots as well, so nothing to change here. Alright, so we can right away change the swap method and do exactly the same thing in it. Nice. Now we can look at the first empty slot method, which should return the first empty slot. So we will actually check that we do have a null item and not a null slot. Okay, so now we actually want to add a new method. A new method which will, as I said earlier, check if we can move an item from one slot to another. So let's look at those first instructions. So first we actually check if we do actually have an item that we're moving in a slot that we're moving, right? I want to name this a bug check, error check, but this should never happen. But just in case, if there's no item that we want to move in, then let's just return false. And also, if the slots are the same, well, again, we want to return false. That's also an error that we do have this line several times in the code, but I actually prefer to have several safety nets just to be sure, kind of foolproofing. Now let's actually call on the canMoveIn methods that we created within our slot types. Here, a very simple behavior actually. If there is no item in the landing point and that the landing point can take the item we want to move, then everything's perfect. We don't need to check anything more. Can I just... And now we actually want to make a check if there's an item in the 2 slots, then we actually want to check that both items can go in the other slots, basically. Okay, so here, very simple. We just check, as I said, that they can go in each other. So now we are done with the inventory functions. So we can move to the actual user interface to update everything that needs to be updated to function with the new behaviors. Let's start with the inventory slot component. Here, we actually want to get rid of this index and item things, and instead, we will actually be using the slot value in order to mimic whatever it's in the inventory. So obviously we do have to change a few things, right? So here in the reload, we will actually not go fetch the item because we do actually have a direct reference to the slot. So when we update something within the inventory, it does update here as well. So all we have to do is just update the textures. So the changes, well, anyway, very simple here. We just basically want to make sure that anytime we call on the item, we do get within the slot object. Here, get drag data, we want to do exactly the same. We want to make sure that when we call on the item, we do call on this slot.item twice. And then we actually want to return the slot as the data and not just the index because there are more information and that's better. Here for the can drop data is actually very simple. We actually use the method that we already created within the singleton. So here we do check that from, which is data, and to, which is the slot we are currently watching, are actually a matching pair to move the items. As for the very last one, which is moving the item, we just need to make sure that we give the right properties. Okay, so that's everything we have to change for the inventory slot component. Now for the UI, we actually need to create a few more nodes within the scene to be able to visually see our new item slots. So I just created a few new containers to have things being organized, and as well as a little image to show a character that's fluff, literally. So now we actually need to update the way we get the nodes for the slot generation because I moved the grid container, so I need to change the way we get this information. I'm also adding the equipment list so that we can add new slots in there. Now we do have access to the nodes to create the children. So what we have to do is to fix the bag slots generation to grab the right information when they are created, and we can also generate now the equipment slots. So here, nothing super crazy. We just generate the equipment slots exactly that, like we generate the inventory slots. We take on the array, we loop on the array, and for each element, we create an item. Here we do change the grid name to bag, and then we want to reproduce the exact same behavior for the equipment slots. So I think we're good. I think we're good. So we just have to check now. We do have warnings. Yes. I think that's the dictionary problem. Inventory.ref.content. Let me just check, but it seems right to me. Yep, seems right. It is. There we have the new prototype. We can effectively move items properly, and we actually can move the items only in the corresponding slot, and that's it. There we go. So if you actually want to go further and have the different items having different behaviors on your characters, like increasing the stats, etc., what we want to do is basically you should have a singleton or a manager or whatever, which is handling the statistics, the stats of your character, and you want in there to browse through the inventory equipment container, and you want to browse each items to see what are the damages or the protection, basically the properties of the items within there to apply their effects. That's it for this video. It's slightly chaotic because it was a very hard video to make and the writing is being very complex. I hope you liked it though and that you enjoyed the result of this, and I will see you in a new video later. You take care.